Thanks very much for your energy, for your stamina here, and making it through to the last round. It's fantastic that you stayed on, and we hope to have a sort of an interesting and dynamic engagement here with the panel. I know we had when we chatted yesterday, there's a lot of interest and diverse thoughts here as well. So hopefully we can keep the energy going through the last part of the day here. We're going to talk about Biotech 2018 on the crest of a wave. And actually, I was just reflecting on that. The crest of a wave. Certainly from the biotech industry sector, there's success there. But by the very name of it, it's implying that that's for a limited period as well, and that just doesn't seem right in some ways. It's certainly not the case in that for a long time now, the biotech sector has been the engine of a lot of the innovation and the new clinical pipelines and a lot of early development that we've seen in the industry. We look at it from a crest of a wave and saying, okay, well, is that coming to an end? Well, it doesn't look like it's going to lose any momentum either. We've got some macro social economic drivers there as well that would point against that. There's clinical pipelines, clinical unmet needs in fast-growing areas, in oncology, in personalized medicines, in orphan drugs, etc. There's huge advances in terms of science and in technology, and it's an attractive space for funding and for attracting funding into this sector as well. So and the biotech segment is sort of sitting at the nexus of where those things come together as well, in terms of the science, the technologies, the unmet needs, and the funding there. But as an industry sector, it can only act as a catalyst for those sorts of things to happen, for that growth to happen. It needs collaboration, and arguably more than almost any other space there. You could argue that collaboration is a core competency of the successful biotech companies there, because without it, they simply don't progress, in the way that they're targeting. So we've got an experienced and really sort of engaging panel here as well, and we're going to explore some of the experience that they've had. We want to keep it very just real, day-to-day experiences there as well, in sort of their experiences of the biotech segment, and what learning have they got from the growing pains that they've experienced in the segment, and also to share some of their thoughts on the changing nature of the product mixes and the supply chains that will supply them. So we'd also really appreciate if you can engage there as well. If there's a bunch of questions from the floor there, please do at any point. If you raise your hand, and we'd like to try and address your questions. But let me start first of all by asking the panel to introduce themselves and maybe briefly comment on their experience within the biotech sector. Priya, shall we start with you and then just move along the panel that way?
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Priya Mande. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and a member of the Board of Directors of Cioxis Therapeutics. Cioxis is a development stage immuno-oncology company. I've been with the company since inception of Cioxis, so it's been about 9 years. We started as a handful of employees. We're now up to 100. We've developed a platform technology which we call T-Sign, Tumor-Specific Immunogene Therapy. It's predicated upon the principles of virology and immunology. So our core technology is based upon oncolytic viral properties, which selectively target and replicate in cancer cells, and we're able to encode those viruses and deliver specific transgenes to tumor cells. The company has grown tremendously. We now have 3 sites, 2 in the UK, 1 in Philadelphia. We've completed some transformational deals. One of the deals which I think then led us into being announced as one of the Fierce 15 for 2000 Fierce Biotech 15 for 2017 was a transformational deal with BMS that was valued at 936 million, which really took us and was able to allow us to build the company and expand into the US. My background, I have over 25 years, over a decade in big pharma, so Glaxo Group Research all the way through to GlaxoSmithKline. I also have spent several years in Pfizer, and I have over a decade in biotech as well, growing biotech companies. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tim Luca. I'm Vice President of External Innovation at Eli Lilly, which is a major pharma company. Our goals are to do search and evaluation and bring in differentiated early technologies and assets into our pipeline. We're situated in geographic hotspots to capture the most innovation we can. Eli Lilly is based around 5 therapeutic areas: oncology, immunology, diabetes, neuroscience, and pain. And we're looking for differentiated assets that can complement what we're doing internally. That's half the job. The other half is that Lilly's invested about $900 million in external venture funds. And so we deal with all the scientific side of those relationships as well. And they're designed not only to provide financial returns, but actually the reason we make those investments in other people's funds is to actually get access to a broad range of other stealth innovators, key opinion leaders, world-class scientists that we wouldn't otherwise be able to fund directly ourselves. So it's a fun job. I deal every day with really exciting biotech people. My background is, I guess, similar 20 years in various aspects of pharma. I did 14 years at AstraZeneca, 4 years at Shire. I spun out my own biotech company that was acquired. So it's been tiny biotech, medium pharma, and large pharma. So hopefully that I've got some perspective, being these days the larger guy, but actually I've been the tiny person as well, begging for money. So it's been quite a fun career, yeah. So thanks.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcel Veltro. I'm currently president for Jubilant's Drug Discovery Services and Contract Development Manufacturing Organization. Indian company. I've always been on the supply side, as opposed to my colleague Tim here. Past 14 years for Indian companies. I started working in India since '99, when DSM at the time acquired a penicillin company. I was the product manager globally. That got me to Asia, India and China in particular. And I enjoyed being in India quite a bit. Have gained quite a bit of insight in working for Indian companies, but globally with innovators in Japan, Europe, and the US, as well as large pharma, mid-size and biotech companies. Actually, my first deal in this industry was with a UK-based biotech company. So I will be sharing some perspective later on how it is different from working with a big company like Luke's Lilly company. Detlef.
Okay, yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Detlef Behrens. I'm the managing director and co-founder of Bio-Pharma. So we started Bio-Pharma 2017 as a consulting company, but moved over quickly into a biotech by just taking over an innovative dermatology asset, which we just right now bringing through the last phase of clinical study. Before that, I have 17 years experience in sales contract manufacturing, dealing with a lot of biotechs. I've spent a bit of time in procurement, dealing with all the CMOs. So I think that means I have the perspective from both angles, and that's what I want to bring into the discussions today.
So hi everyone, my name is Tim Sperry and I'm the Chief Exec of a recently emerged from stealth mode called Navintum Bioscience. We're based here in central London and we have a brand new approach to targeting resistance and relapse in cancer that doesn't involve IO. I've been running this business now for 2 years since founding or co-founding with my partner. Prior to that, 25 years of R&D experience in large pharma, and the last 10 years of that 25 in various biotech companies, all developing novel technologies.
Thanks, Tim. So we said that, there's around more than almost 4,000 biotech companies worldwide, and they're developing huge amounts of innovative new products there. The vast majority of the biotech, of course, don't have the in-house capabilities to advance the opportunities in the late clinical development and commercialize them. So, the success is predicated on collaboration. So, enact collaborations across multiple stakeholder groups. So we wanted to just get maybe a few real-world examples from the team here about, how does that work, what goes well, what's a challenge, and how do these groups come together to work more effectively. So Tim Luca, if I start with you, maybe from the role you're in at the moment in terms of big pharma there, when you're evaluating, because you see literally thousands, right, of different kinds of opportunities there across platform technologies, drugs, companies, etc. What's missing? What are the things that you most commonly see that's missing as you evaluate them and as you look towards integrating them into your, into your operations there as well? That can serve to help stimulate the ideas of other folks here on what they should really be focusing on to have a more complete offering.
Sure, I mean it's an enormous question, obviously.
In 2 minutes.
Hot team, great IP position, differentiated offering from all standards of care, clear patient need, patient segmentation. I mean, that's how we sort of start choosing things. But once we've chosen them, then there's obviously a gap in terminology sometimes that what pharma would call a candidate or a phase 1 asset. I've got a lot of respect for biotech entrepreneurs because they have to adhere sometimes to the critical path for funding reasons, and they don't often be able to put on all the bells and whistles onto their programs. But some of those aren't bells and whistles; they're necessary for making it through the next phase of development. So, simplistically, for example, we see a lot of early biotech companies that seem to have interesting biology, but it's not clear whether a target's been engaged, whether the molecule's actually got to the target site of action. Maybe the endpoints are a little bit more woolly. Some in neuroscience, for example, behavioural endpoints are very flaky and don't always translate into disease. But nevertheless, it's the start of something interesting. But it's simplistic to think that someone will take a very large clinical bet on a molecule where those things aren't as sorted out as they possibly can be. And it's all very well saying the molecule seems to be doing something interesting preclinically, but to have a vice president or a board member of a pharma company to say, okay, we're going to put 300 million into a development program, that's a big bet that many of us in this room have no experience of making, and we have got quite a lot of choice. It's a really great time in medical innovation at the moment, and we need to try to make the most risk assessed best we can. So it may seem, some of those things may seem superfluous at the early stages, but the more of those you can get into place if you do have the funding to do it, the better. And certainly having a clear hypothesis, proving you've engaged a target and what expected endpoint you're going to reach and how that might actually make its way onto a label is the kind of journey from embryo through to full adult that we all try to sort of help with to try and get things through to market, because ultimately patients need this stuff. So that's probably the biggest thing. Don't cut back to the minimum, because someone's going to have to do that work, and we probably won't buy it if too many of those are missing, and we have to go back a long way to put them in place, because we're also looking for often first-in-class opportunities, and the more that first-in-class position is eroded by having to redo a lot of studies, the less attractive the deal looks. So I guess that's one consideration.
The cost saving there's the time that's lost significantly outweighs any cost saving that you see from the shortcuts that are taken from that side.
Yeah, and some of them we understand why they're taken, but get good advice from a range of people to work out what is a sensible risk to take and a cost to cut, and which ones are really going to be pivotal to getting a good development program later. And there's a few of those that are missing in some companies that unfortunately we can't transact on because they're too big studies, or they're not competitive assets anymore if they haven't got those things in place. So yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. Maybe Priya and Tim, from a biotech perspective, and again, be real authentic here as well. You don't have name and shame or anything, but what are the typical challenges that you face when dealing with, large pharma and with CDMOs there?
I mean, picking up on Tim's point, cash flow. Clearly, in the early days of any biotech company, anyone who's been involved in a small company knows that cash is king, and exactly as sort of Tim has said, working out what needs to be done. So in terms of, trying to mitigate risk, pushing forward with the development program, trying to achieve those value inflection points within the portfolio, and really just trying to work with, particularly with suppliers. As a small company, we outsource everything. We still outsource pretty much most of what we do, apart from our core discovery research. We've identified our core competencies that we wish to keep in-house, but all of our manufacturing, supply chain, all of our clinical activity, a lot of our GLP work is all outsourced because we don't have the critical mass or the need to establish that capability internally ourselves at this moment. We don't have the volume or the throughput. And then challenges is making sure that the big companies that we engage with, because we do work with a combination of niche and larger scale suppliers, is recognizing that we have specific bespoke needs as well. We don't have the purchasing, procurement, leveraging power of saying multiple studies, economies of scale and scope. So we really do have to depend upon relationship management. But oh my goodness, that is our crown jewel, and it needs to be protected, needs to be nurtured. So we like to work with companies who really recognise that and really want to work with us. And recognise that, yes, this is incredibly important. And if they don't deliver, or if there is a delay for whatever reason because of poor planning from the supplier perspective, that can have a huge impact on a small company, an exponential impact.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Priya.
I think I can hopefully build on that. And what the view I would give is very much having had experience in my last two companies of developing technologies that perhaps started and may well still remain on the margins of mainstream. And so I think, in addition to all the points that Priya's mentioned, it's very technology dependent. And with my current company, we're in the cancer metabolism area, which is, I think, a growing and hot space. And it may well be the next area beyond IO. And of course, IO has been the dominant theme in cancer now for quite some time, and patients mopped up in clinical studies, getting access to CROs, CMOs that can help non-IO based companies is quite difficult, and that's the experience we're having right now. So I think the technology you're developing also impacts how you can interface with CDMOs and also pharma. And having come from the pharma background, and depending on the audience, numbers of pharma and CDMOs here will hopefully offend the smallest group the least, or the most, depending where you're sitting. But pharma doesn't always have the appetite for risk necessarily. And of course, pharma's trying to change the model and the approach with hubs and engagement closer to biotech companies physically, especially in light of many pharma companies closing research bases, so they don't have that proximity to biotech. So I think the model's evolved in terms of interacting, but I do think perhaps the biggest factor is the technology you're developing and whether it's genuinely new and different, and therefore the phase of educating your potential investor or partner is a long slog because it's so different, or is it an incremental improvement on existing, which perhaps is where IO is becoming a space where you're adding to IO1, IO2, IO3, so it's a very different mindset. And that's been my experience the last 2 years. It's a hard place to be sometimes when you are trying to challenge orthodoxy and bring a new technology to the table where there's no acceptance, let alone understanding of what you're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. And that to me is the biggest factor.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Tim. Detlef, maybe then I'll ask you to go into your history, not your job you're in at the moment, but before. From the CRO, CDMO space, where do you see, if you compare, let's say, large pharma to biotech there, where do you see some of the biggest difference or challenges that you have to face?
So if I'm just looking on large pharma, they have a huge amount of money, so they can really plan, I think, what they want to do. And what's probably required, I think Priya was mentioning cash flow is everything at a biotech company. So you're not living in an ideal world. So that means, okay, you need to be flexible. I think you need to align your development program, I think, not with the ideal world. It's more, I think, about, okay, what can I achieve with the money I have available? And that's a challenge. And if you go to a CMO, I think they still have their views, okay, large pharma's telling me what to do, and I think that's a standard program, and they don't know what to do with that if someone is coming with something completely different. In addition to that, biotechs, they have to change quite often, I think, their program because of cash flow of certain data, of something new, and that means, okay, there's no constant program. I think it's constantly under progress, and as well, that's something what let's say the CMO we doing the work for Bio-Pharma is facing. I think we probably made them a hard time. In four months, I think we changed 5 times the entire program. So we just made them crazy, but that's the way I think how it is. And I think it's not that we had no idea and no planning out of that, but it's just a thing that's the nature of the business, and that's it. And I believe is a lot of the CMOs, they talk about, okay, we want to have business with biotechs, but at the end of the day, they're just stuck in let's call it in their large pharma perspective. That's the way how we do it, and I think they're not capable to be as flexible as possible to deal with the biotechs. Predominantly, then if it's something completely new, then they get completely lost.
Thanks, Dilip. So just back to one of the points that Tim made there, Tim Luca made. In terms of speed, is very, very important then, first to market, etc. Marcel, for you, what do you think stops us developing things faster? Regulatory authorities, in the past we could say, okay, the timelines and the speed at which they can adapt to accelerate approval used to stand in the way. We can't really use that as an excuse anymore, right? So as an industry, have we been able to respond as fast as we should, and what do you think we need to do?
So I think the clear answer is no, at least that's my opinion. You're right, 10 years ago in these meetings there was a lot of bitching and moaning about the regulator, the FDA, everything was slow, and that is not the case anymore. If you look at the approvals last year and this year, the majority of them are orphan drugs that have been given a pathway of 4 to 5 years. And I've sat in meetings with big pharma clients, these suppliers, they generally do not have the structure to develop a compound to market in 4 years. So I think there is a lot of innovation in the way how you accelerate innovation to have benefit from that accelerated pathway. And that is where biotechs are accelerating. And you see that, contrary to the past, more and more companies are able to take products to market, because the niche therapies don't mean that you have 5,000 detail force on the road visiting hospitals. You have a few clinics. So you can actually, with 40, 50 people, launch a compound. And there are one company wonders, if you will, but they can survive on the patent life. And so it is becoming a much more hybrid scenario where it's not only big pharma, it is definitely biotech. And I think this crest of the wave is going to continue for quite a while. And you see the evidence even this year. There's a brochure here circulating at this conference. And 2018, again, looks like a bumpy year for biotech. So, and that's been my experience, as I mentioned in my introduction, the speed with which they have to operate under tight cash, they're cash strapped. I mean, the Darwinism, I sense, the struggle for life survival of the fittest is kind of what big pharma was looking for, because they lost that a bit. And my first deal, I said, was with a biotech company, no surprise. In parallel, I was talking to a big pharma company, and by the time I was accepted after a 2-year process in that big pharma company, I had supplied phase 1, phase 2 material for the biotech company. But then once you are accepted in big pharma, the thoroughness and the systematic approach is such that we did 25 programs in a year with them. So then they catch up quickly, because the scaling of big pharma is clearly in a different order of magnitude. So I think that is what I see as a difference. I've been yelled at by CEOs of big pharma companies for the past 14 years when you don't have your kilo of material ready for either the tox study or their first in human study, because they have a board meeting in 3 months and the result will determine whether they get another cash injection, yes or no. Now that sensation you don't experience with big pharma. And to have the balance of both is absolutely spectacular. And I have always heard big pharma complain about, well, they have not done enough for the package, but the ecosystem does not pay for the access of it, and you will have to overcome some level of discomfort or lack of detail that's there, and still push it through, because there is amazing innovation coming out. So you're not going to be able to walk away from it. And there's quite a few companies that have 50% or more of their revenue from in-licensed innovation rather than in-house innovation. So I think it's a reality of this industry that innovation is no longer the purview of a small set of companies, but it is spreading around the world by virtue of going after unmet need.
Thanks, Marcel. Any views from the audience there in terms of speed, how we can?
Thanks very much. I'd just like to pick up on Tim's point actually in terms of target engagement and again just to say how critical that is, you know, and there's a lot of biotechs out there actually don't get that. You know, that's probably one of the most critical things that you need to show. You know, why do compounds fail? Because you haven't engaged with the target, i.e. you've probably not got the right exposure. The target isn't relevant to disease or it's toxic, you know, and they're the critical things. That's it really in a nutshell. There are lots of frilly bits around the edges that you may need, but that is so important. And you know, we've supported many clients when you realise they haven't engaged with the target, and the effect they're seeing is something quite different. It's different pharmacology. So I absolutely agree with Tim. If there's any biotech people in the audience, I'd recommend that.
Thank you. So we've got. They look very youthful, the panel. They've actually got a lot of years' experience, though. So I thought what we might do is just pick their brains a little bit in terms of those years of experience. Priya and Tim, you've had direct experiences there, of billion-dollar transformational type deals. If you look at that again from the perspective of big pharma, from biotech, there, what sort of critical success factors were behind them?
So, from our perspective, clarity of expectation is critical. Understanding what each party needs. I mean, look, this isn't rocket science. The fundamentals and the economics of the deal will always prevail, right? So the technology, the data in hand, nothing trumps data. Excuse the pun. But so it's the softer elements that make the real differences. So stakeholder management, understanding, you know, the devil is in the detail. How are we going to make decisions? So the governance of some of the collaborations that we've entered into, who makes the decision, how are we going to make the decision, how are we going to share information? I mean, for us, we're a platform technology. So each of our deals, for example, one of the deals that I referred to earlier, that's a preclinical asset. That's a preclinical candidate that is now in clinic. But we've got other preclinical candidates that are feeding off the same platform technology. So the core IP remains, you know, we need to own that and just really being quite clear about some of the fundamentals around the technology. So the detail around the plans, how we will, you know, work through the decision making around risk management, development programs, working together on an ongoing basis, how we manage intellectual property, really understanding the drivers around cost, time and risk. So with another one of our collaboration deals, we agreed that we would remain sponsor of the clinical trials and we would continue to manage all of the supplier relationships because the big pharma felt that we had that body of knowledge, basically. It was our core technology. It's a combination study, but we had the body of knowledge and the competency to do so. Tim?
Yeah, I would totally agree with all of that. I mean, I think from our side, pharma companies can be seen as a bit slow and indecisive, and I think for single asset deals where there's a package of data, the right team reviews it and they make a decision, that's fine. But I deal in earlier stage innovation and platforms and disruptive technologies, and I think the learning from our side is that actually we have to be fast enough that we can put a competitive offer in and not be trumped by someone else.
Don't use the T word, please.
That's twice now.
But I think we need a wider group of people in the company to buy into this. So, I mean, we did a very substantial deal this year with an Israeli biotech company that stops RNA being translated into protein. So it's instead of inhibiting the actual malformed protein or the aberrant protein through a small molecule or an antibody, this company is not an siRNA, but it actually stops the protein being formed in a very unusual way. So that was $1 billion deal. But we actually did a small pilot study with that company for $100,000 about a year previously, and that got all of our heads of biology excited. It got some of the people who'd had failed internal projects excited, and then we had to sort of build out the excitement through the heads of therapeutic areas, the heads of biology, the heads of chemistry, the vice presidents of various bits of the company, anyone who might be interested in the deal who would have something to say, the intellectual property guys, the lawyers. We had a competitive intelligence run. You know, there's a whole flurry of stuff that goes on that people don't realise, but that enabled us to do $1 billion deal. everyone loved it. That's now going super well. And actually it's got full resource, internal to the company at the same level as a normal internal project would be. Everyone's planned for success to go all the way to the clinic. So the reason why we're perceived sometimes as being a bit slower and a bit lumbering is because people are focused on this bit, we're focused on making sure it gets to here. And so all of this is lined up ready, so we press go and it executes. And that can take a little bit more time, and that can be stressful for smaller parties. I mean, honestly, our IT questionnaire at Lilly's, I think, is bigger than the science diligence. It's about like 400 questions about how they handle data security. And but when you're on a small company with 3 people trying to deal with this like flurry of all these requests, I'm sure you've had this. Like, just another 30 questions. Do you mind answering this? Do you mind answering that? But actually, the reason is a good one, that we want things to actually get to patients. And the more we can line up, the bigger deal you'll get, and the more buy-in there is from all the stakeholders. And actually, that's what provides the resource and the further dollars to actually make this go all the way. And actually, if you want to talk about money, which is often what we cut to, if these projects don't go all the way, they don't earn royalties and milestones. And a lot of these big bio-dollar deals, the real big money comes if things get to phase 2, phase 3 and beyond. So I would say the learning is try and be patient with us as pharma partners, because we're well intended. And if you're too narrow in your vision of like moaning about this little bit here, when we're actually already here thinking about what's going to happen, that's maybe a little bit of the disconnect. So yeah, I think that's probably the learning, just getting everyone on the same page, not only inter-company, but also intra-company. When it's a big company, that can be as much work.
Okay, thanks for that. So, we hear a bit about the risk-sharing deals. I'm not sure how effective many of them really turn out to be there. Tim Sperry, you've done a lot of different types of deals. It's something that interests you in this particular space here. I mean, how do you see risk sharing or other types of creative deals to, affect companies coming together in a way that, it's mutually beneficial?
I think that's been the biggest change in the last 5 to 8 years, is the ability and willingness, certainly on the pharma side, to look at different types of risk sharing. I think the example Tim gave there, where perhaps from the pharma perspective, a relatively small amount of money enabled data to be generated, presumably in that case, that meant a decision could be made. I think that's an example to me of something pharma could do a lot more of, where 100,000, 300,000 is a lot of money for a small biotech with a cash runway that's always finite, and that enables key studies to be done. I think if pharma was willing to do more of those, then I think there'd be more innovation fostered and stimulated. So I think that's a concrete example this side, that on the biotech, from the biotech side, will be welcome. Particularly, again, if you recall from my perspective, new technologies that require a lot of education and selling, to have data that can be generated perhaps that we couldn't on our own dollar, get others to get more interested, that will be a big change. So I think that's a good example that Tim's given. But from my own experience, did an equity investment from a large pharma and a collaboration. And the key challenges there were to get the element of risk sharing right, and that often comes down to the economics, of course, to get the right amount of FTE funding, the right amount of optionality, literally, in the deal. What's a fair option term when the farmer's investing in FTEs and a portion of your intellectual property? That's obviously, you have different perspectives on that. But in that case, we got it right. But the crucial piece there was understanding the individuals, the decision makers, but most importantly, the strategic interests of both parties, as Priya was saying. In that case, the farmer was looking outside the walls of its own, perhaps less than effective R&D machine, and wanted to access more innovation in a way that perhaps wasn't going to be as expensive, because they couldn't put every dollar into the external R&D. So again, investing from the pharma side in innovation, whilst also maintaining some semblance of an internal R&D machine, was a delicate balance. And when we understood that made that the boundaries between understanding what was fair risk sharing, actually quite easy once you got past that part of the decision-making process from both sides. I think to me then, the strategic considerations are really important, because that filters down to all aspects of the deal, in particular the appetite for risk sharing from both sides and what's a fair give.
Okay. Marcel, Detlef, I'd like to get your perspectives as well on that as well. But are there any other sort of views, perspectives, questions from the audience on deal structures, what's working, what's good, what's ugly? No? all a bit quiet. It's been a long day. So, Marcel?
And we have plenty of time. There's no wine waiting for us after 5 o'clock, so we can sit here till 6 o'clock and sort this out. I think there's been a maturing in risk share deals. Roughly a decade ago, it was actually Lily, Tim, I have to thank you, that taught Jubilant in India to do drug discovery. But quite a few of the programs, risk share programs, did not involve a cash payment. It was a milestone-based scenario. And at the end of the day, if you do not have commercial revenue, you're going to go down under if you do not make it to clinic. And a lot of the early leads or candidates or targets were not the high-profile ones because they were kept in-house, which I think is not the right motivation to do risk-share deals, and finally it ended. But of recent, we see a hybrid model where it's perhaps not risk-share, but build in an incentive level where we are working with one large pharma company in Europe, and for reduced FTE rates, we are given upsides and when we reach milestones, and these things move through the various phases of their programs. And if you do the math on the end, it makes sense for me to participate in those kind of arrangements. So I think that is a more mature approach because it builds in an incentive to drive speed and give that priority. And throughout the day, I don't know who was part of these CDMO discussions, relationships, there was a lot of back and forth and some therapy here and there, but it is about speed. You have a pathway to go fast, and how do you incentivize that speed? Another example is 4 months ago, we signed a deal with a US VC. They had the idea, they are asking us to do the entire integrated program, and on top of that, at full price, on top of that, they offered 10% common stock. So we were quite surprised what's going on here, based on past experience. But again, it's a scenario where you get common stock when you move to the next milestone. So they're building in a carrot. If there's nothing to share, there's nothing to share. But the upsides that this company has shown on a portfolio of 15 deals like that is 300 million plus. So they only have to replicate an example like that every year out of their portfolio, and they're golden, and they're very successful VC. So we see, I think, incentives being built in to drive that speed and focus and to make a company like ourselves do more. Because then the choice is, do I want that milestone or the incentive, yes or no? And how can I resource it in a way that I overcome a hurdle, do a couple of extra experiments or another iteration in medicinal chemistry? And I think that is a more healthy risk-based deal that from a CDMO perspective works for me.
Okay. So was there something particular there, Marcel, for that 10% that you had to do significantly up and above what you would have expected to achieve?
So,
I mean, is it...
no, it was... it's kind of the way that VCs work. They incentivize their staff. They have 4 or 5 experts from the industry. They are not paid a high amount. Their incentive is you get equity in the company. So in a way, they are just translating that model. They give you equity, and of course, it gets diluted very quickly. So they're not giving away 100 million to us. But if you do well, you still end up getting a nice surplus that makes this very, very nice carrot almost. It's a carrot. And we didn't ask for it. And we were thinking about, so are we getting enough? Why is this? Are they being generous? And then, no, this is how they do business with the folks they bring on board. Because they are launching biotechs every 3 months or every 2 months. So they're in the biotech launch business almost. And they don't need funding. They have a huge fund and they have made money. And that's being circulated back into innovation. And for them, it's key to get the right people together. And word people has come up a couple of times today. And if you get that energy and that passion, because that is the sense of urgency you sense in biotech, perhaps more than in very large companies. That is the experience that I've had in the past, just the past year on this front.
Thanks for that. Detlef, anything from...
Yeah, I think what I believe is something what is contrary to that is that a lot of the CMOs in the meantime are just owned by private equity. So I think they don't have a long-term view. The only thing what they want to get is just make cash as quickly as possible. So they are not, at the end of the day, they are not interested in any long-term deals, long-term cooperations with biotechs, putting certain, let's say, certain risk in by just investing into some equipment or what's required. that's not, I think, their business. They're completely out of it. They always talk about, I think, yeah, we want to deal with the biotechs, we want to do that, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, I think they are completely, I think, working opposite to that. And I think that's probably the dilemma, because they just focused on just making the company nice as quickly as possible and move over to the next private equity company.
Okay,
And
thanks.
that's, I think, for that corporation, that's for sure not sustainable.
Okay, thank you. So, quick one each, 1 minute max each. So, you learn more from things that go wrong often than you do things that go right. If you could give very brief words of advice on what to watch out for when putting deals together, specifically in the biotech segment, what would that one word of advice or one statement of advice be? Who wants to go first?
I can go first. I think making sure that terminology is clearly understood. There are a number of, there's a lot of jargon in our industry. Many people are, long-term scientists, PhDs. They spew all these things out all the time. Even between pharma companies, the words often mean different things. A word like milestone can mean a trigger within a project, or it can mean a payment after the project's finished. Candidate can mean a whole plethora of stuff, from almost garbage through to something that goes straight into patients. And even anything to do with criteria, terminology, it may be obvious to you, but I would just triple check when the other side says it back to you, it's meaning the same thing.
Okay.
We have all sorts of ones. What's a validated here? What's a non-validated here? What's a pre-candidate? What's even a tox program? What actually is it? Is it like one dose and see if the animals die, or is it like 3 years worth of work to GLP? All these terms band around, and they're very easy to confuse, and they will screw up deals big time when suddenly this all comes out the woodwork at the last minute.
Okay, Tim.
I don't mind. So depending on who the parties are to the deal, in addition to sort of having a common language, I think some diligence requirements as well. So understanding, what will happen, what will be the process when things go wrong, because things will go wrong, because it's drug development. So, having contingency plans, but also an understanding of responsiveness and how, actually working through some scenarios. We've found benefit of hindsight is always rather marvellous. So, trying to sort of anticipate some of that, and not to be too prescriptive around it, but even just in starting the dialogue can sometimes help in terms of ensuring that any previous and past lessons are brought forward.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah, so a few experiences that I had, which I would leave as a recommendation, is from a CDMO perspective, is transparency of the project itself. What is the purpose? If you're feeding into a black box, you don't know that you're feeding a tox study or a 7-day mouse study or a 9-month pivotal doc study, which is going to enable IND and launch, etc., or filing of first in human. I think that is a key point. Then you also become part of the project, and you get that extra energy that is not just a shipment of a few kilo or an activity. You're part of the project. I think that's one. The other part is quite a few companies I've dealt with this is small molecules, a med chemist that has done milligram or gram synthesis, and he wants 3 kilo for a 9-month doc study of a 15-step synthesis. And he is surprised that you have scale-up struggles and that you've not done the R&D or the process development to generate enough know-how to even be able to make it. And then I've had to step in with some very candid conversations that this is not going to fly. If you want to do this, you will have to invest in a more process understanding, because it's the complexity of what you've designed in the first place. And that is a big difference in big pharma. They have seen everything go wrong internally. So there's a much greater understanding and maturity, if you will. And that is not talking about you mess up or you screw up. Then you have to come out and say, this is why it went wrong. But often it is it's knowledge that wasn't there, and that is part of the whole development process. And only when you launched does the knowledge have to be complete. These days, with the complexity of small molecules in particular, you are forced almost to consider extra development early on that are not phase required, but that are complexity required. So that would be another one.
Okay, thanks, Marcel.
So at the end of the day, what a lot of things have been already addressed. I think it's clear you need to all parties on the table need to understand what we're talking about. Transparency, I agree with you, Marcel, is absolutely important. I think as long as all parties on the table are aware of what it is about and think what should be the achievement, then you can at least pull in the right direction altogether. And I think you need to have, let's say, at least try to get, I think, the data you're collecting over the time, I think, in the right way. I just read an article and there was a question, okay, is it the right approach for biotechs just to do it as quickly as possible? I think just to, let's say, get the funding and get into clinics, and then figure out at a later stage, okay, we have missed a lot of things in the let's say, in the more simple part of CMC development, which is then causing a lot of issues at a later stage. So it's always a question here is, okay, what is required, I think, what is possible as well in terms of available money, but I think you can always try to create something under the circumstances which are given, which are, let's say, suitable, I think, to move forward in all parties' interest in a good way.
So I think there's actually one word that sums up what we've heard, which I think is some nice elements. We've heard terminology, we've heard transparency, we've heard common purpose, but all those lead to trust. And of course, trust is really hard to build in the courtship prior to a deal, during the deal negotiation, which is always a testing time, and then often, most importantly, and usually overlooked despite best intentions, with alliance management functions and what have you. But after the deal is done, that period where transfer between individuals happens and trust can be easily lost. I think the trust piece is really, really important, and all these factors contribute to that. Unless those are all well understood, then building trust is very difficult, because ultimately deals are done between people.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary, actually, Tim. Thank you. Yep.
So, question: this year has been one of the biggest venture years ever. Has the quality of the deals gone down? And if you didn't get funded this year, should you kind of think about another pursuit?
Visiting Las Vegas, yes.
I mean, at Lilly, I think we're investors in about 15 different venture funds. As I said, it's a lot of money, and we choose those funds very carefully for the quality of the deals they can put together and their access to innovation. I would absolutely say no, the quality of deals is not going down. If anything, the bar's getting even higher. So few medicines get approved. You know, there's so many considerations around what's worth backing, how good the team is, can it go all the way, is it really different to what we've already got? There is a lot of money out there, so I think if you're good and you've got a great idea, it's a great time to approach venture capital. It's not for everyone. You end up selling your soul a little bit, and you have to give away a good chunk of your company to actually get the funding. But certainly, I can say that we've done, I think, deals with. We've bought billion-dollar products from our venture fund portfolio where we are a small investor in the fund, and they've created companies, and then 5 years later, actually, it's come good. And we bought CoLucid, a migraine treatment at Lilly that was run through that. We bought a CGRP antibody from Atlas. We've got a number of these deals that have come really good, and in my role, I'm more looking at investing in very early stage ideas that could make it in the future. And I can tell you some of the things we've seen have been amazing, like really amazing. The team, the science, the hypotheses would blow you away. And I think if you think you could be part of that crew, I would just recommend you go for it. And I can say my personal experience, I worked on a very small spin-out company, and it wasn't in a sexy area. It wasn't immuno-oncology. I totally hear you. We're in a very unusual part of behavioural health, and I think we had to go to about 80 different investors, and we got 2 offers in the end, and that company was successfully acquired. So there is also a perseverance message here, and that isn't actually unique to venture either. I mean, me personally at Lilly, we probably see, I probably see over 1,000 opportunities a year, maybe closer to 2, and I can tell you that we transact seriously on single-figure numbers. So it's 0.1% success rate. There's so many stars have to align to do these kinds of deals that I really wouldn't get too downhearted. Many people have been turned down multiple times and still are super successful at the end of the day. Many of these products that actually make it to market and get bought out for these mega dollars that look like monopoly money to me, they've changed hands 2 or 3 times along that journey before they actually make it. So I would say don't give up. If you've got a great idea, persevere. It's going to be a tough journey, but if it's good, it will make it. That'll be my personal view.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So maybe we'll just change tack a little bit. We just have a couple of minutes. We don't have a great deal longer, but I'd like to just ask a few questions about, how do we adapt to changing supply chains? How, the products are clearly changing. There's new capabilities that's needed there. How do we find different ways of working to drive efficiency there with these new supply chains? So maybe Tim Sparry, I'd just ask you, maybe you could just say a few words about how you see the changes, for the significant changes in products. If it's another small molecule, a little bit different than, but what do you see the big changes in supply chains of the future, the types of products?
Well, I guess from my own personal experience at Merck in CNS R&D, it was small molecules through and through, and that was 10 years of that. And looking back, it wasn't particularly diverse in experience. But since then, again, 10 years in biotech, very different product types from what we're currently doing at Novintum, which we would classify as small molecules, but as a chemist, you can see that differently. And from a manufacturing perspective, there will be challenges with transferring, I think, the comparison between a chemist making 50 milligrams and requiring a kilo, that's always a different skill set. So finding the right groups that can think through a synthetic route, which perhaps hasn't been scaled up before, is on paper perhaps a simple challenge, but in practice is a very different one. And I think more generally it speaks to a growing diversity in product type. If we think back 30, 40 years when small molecules were king, of course everything's got larger in terms of molecular weight and complexity. And now, of course, very much cell-based therapies are coming in with, of course, a changing regulatory environment, particularly in the US. So there's a massive diversity in product type. And that's an opportunity, clearly, for providers that have the manufacturing expertise along with the regulatory expertise. So I think it's just only an opportunity. Going back just to finish with Novintum in mind, which, of course, I'm focused on, we're in the middle of discussions with providers right now for GMP synthesis, and it's not been as easy as I thought because the expertise isn't out there. Again, it's a new approach. So again, that's a challenge, bringing a new technology into development, finding the right level of expertise both on the investor side to understand, on the pharma side to partner with, and also on the manufacturing side.
So maybe one more question there. In terms of how we better manage those supply chains in the future. How do we sort of mitigate any disruption or delays as we transition ownership of supply chains there as well, from the ownership maybe in the biotech to big pharma there. Maybe, Priya, Tim, you can give some maybe different perspectives on that particular point.
So I was in a predecessor company. I worked for a company called Powdermed, and we transferred I was actually responsible for transferring the technology into Pfizer when we were acquired. And I've said this already, the devil is in the detail. The tech transfer plan that we built ran into thousands of Excel lines. It really did. In terms of working closely with Pfizer, and I think Tim's already said this as well, in terms of trust, all the stakeholders, there has to be a degree of trust, and we see that now in today in terms of working with supply chains, looking at the different disruptive technologies, CAR-T, personalised medicines. We're in the field of gene therapy for cancer at Cyoxis, so we're looking at adenoviral manufacturing and supply chain thereof, cold chain, pre-filled syringes, lots of new technologies. How do we combine that? We're having to work with a number of suppliers and work together, and in order to really break new ground in terms of technologies and how we create the IP. So there has to be that prevailing trust. There has to be a sort of risk-reward appetite around that as well.
Thanks.
I half of me wants to say it's all based around trust, and I agree with that. But I think there's different categories of trust, actually. So when we're doing a deal that is involving a technology we already have, we know how to assess it. So if we're buying a small molecule or a biology platform or an antibody or something, we've got rafts of people who can give good commentary on how to help and how to make it successful, and hopefully we can also learn from the expertise at the partner as well and all their suppliers, and as a team effort it will be successful. What's a bit more unusual is when you buy a technology that you don't have any core competency in. So if you bolt on an acquisition to your company that actually very few people at your company know what to say, that's a bit different, and then the level of trust required is a lot higher. So, I mean, we announced a substantial deal with an RNA therapeutics company this week, and we have had some efforts in that space, but this is a big deal, and it's going to be quite interesting how that goes. I mean, the partner is amazing, it's all there for success, but we don't have buildings of people that are used to assessing that kind of stuff, and it's going to be even worse when things like oncolytic viruses, gene therapy, medical devices that stimulate your brain. There's a whole load of very disruptive things happening, all of which look super exciting. It's just working out how to get that right when you don't have the core competency. It's a very different level of trust required than one where you could ask 50 people who manufacture antibodies to come and take a look at it for you. So it's going to be an interesting future, I think, for sure.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably a good way to wrap up. It certainly will be, I'm sure, Tim and panel. The good news and the bad news is we have run out of time. I was getting some body signals over there that I need to stop. So, and I know Trevor Jones is going to just say a few closing remarks for the overall event. So I would like to, I was saying there's good news and bad news. The good news is this debate is going to continue as well as when the first pharma integrate started around 7 years ago, it was a heavy sort of big pharma sort of CDMO type centric discussion, and the interest in the biopharma segment is steadily increased, not surprisingly. So actually in May, if you look at the back of your brochure there, you'll see this very same hotel. There's going to be an extended discussion one day specifically on this kind of field here as well. So I'm sure that's a very interesting event for us all. So I'd just like to thank everyone. You stuck it out to the very end. Thank you for that. Thanks for the stamina and engagement, and a big thanks to the panel as well. Thank you.